The scorching heat of the Texas sun beat down mercilessly as Tatiana Andersen stepped off the stagecoach onto the dusty streets of Willow Creek, her trembling hands clutching a worn leather satchel containing everything she owned in the world. The year was 1875, and at 22 years old she had traveled over 5,000 miles from her home in St. Petersburg, Russia, to this unforgiving frontier town, chasing the promise of a new life after her parents' tragic deaths. "Watch your step, miss," the stagecoach driver said, handing her the small trunk that contained her few remaining possessions. "Thank you very much," Tatiana replied, her thick Russian accent coating each word like honey on warm bread. "Is this Main Street of Willow Creek?" The driver gave her an odd look, the corners of his mouth twitching. "Yes'm, this here's Main Street. Good luck to ye." He tipped his hat and climbed back onto his perch, leaving Tatiana alone in the unfamiliar street. The town bustled with afternoon activity, cowboys sauntering between the saloon and general store, women in practical dresses carrying parcels, children darting between buildings playing games of chase. Tatiana squared her shoulders and headed toward the hotel she'd circled in the newspaper advertisement that had brought her here. She needed lodging before seeking out the seamstress position she'd come to claim. The Willow Creek Hotel stood 3 stories tall, its white paint peeling but still respectable. Tatiana pushed through the door, the bell above it announcing her arrival. The lobby was cool compared to the blazing heat outside, and she took a moment to collect herself before approaching the front desk. "Good afternoon," she said to the older woman behind the counter. "I would like room, please. For several nights until I find permanent place to stay." The woman looked up, her eyebrows rising at Tatiana's accent. "Well, ain't that something? Where are you from, girl?" "Russia. St. Petersburg," Tatiana answered, standing tall despite her fatigue. "Russia?" The woman let out a sharp laugh. "Land sakes, what's a Russian girl doing all the way out here in Willow Creek, Texas? I come for position at dress shop. Mrs. Miller advertised for seamstress in newspaper." The woman's expression changed. "Oh, honey. I hate to tell you this, but old Mrs. Miller passed on 3 weeks ago. Her nephew closed up the shop and sold everything off." Tatiana felt the floor shift beneath her feet. The position was gone? The entire reason for her journey vanished. I do not understand. The advertisement. Those papers take time to travel." 5 minutes to be weak, then strength must return. Morning brought no relief from her predicament, but Tatiana was determined. She dressed in her best blue dress, pinned her dark hair neatly, and set out to find employment. The general store seemed the logical place to start. The store owner, a rotund man named Mr. Patterson, listened to her inquiry with growing amusement. "A Russian, eh? We don't get many foreigners in these parts." "I am hard worker," Tatiana insisted. "I speak English well, I can count, right? Can't hardly understand a word you're sayin', miss," he interrupted with a chuckle. "Besides, my customers expect proper American service. The bank, the post office, even the laundry, each encounter ended similarly." By midday, Tatiana's spirit was flagging, though her expression remained determined. She paused outside the Silver Spur Saloon, hesitating. A saloon was no place for a respectable woman, but she was growing desperate. Inside, the dim light and smell of whiskey and tobacco smoke assaulted her senses. Several men turned to stare as she entered, conversation momentarily halting. "Can I help you, miss?" the barkeeper asked, his tones suggesting the opposite. "I look for work," Tatiana said clearly. "Any position." This brought raucous laughter from several patrons. "Did you hear that accent?" one man called out. "Sounds like she's choking on something. Maybe she could work for the circus," another suggested, prompting more laughter. Tatiana felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her chin high. "I am seamstress. I can cook, clean, serve. I learn quickly. Listen to that." A red-faced man at a nearby table stood, swaying slightly. "Say something else, girlie. You're better entertainment than the piano player." "I am not entertainment," Tatiana replied coldly, her accent thickening with anger. I am person seeking honest work. The men laughed harder. The red-faced man began to mimic her, exaggerating her accent to grotesque proportions while his companions slapped the table in delight. Tatiana fought the urge to flee, knowing she couldn't afford the luxury of pride. But as the mockery continued, a new voice cut through the saloon. That's enough. The voice was deep, steady as stone, and carried an authority that silenced the room immediately. Tatiana turned toward the sound. A tall man stood in the doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun. As he stepped inside, she could see he wore the dust of the trail jeans, boots, a simple shirt with a leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat. His face was tanned from the sun, with several days' worth of stubble on his strong jaw. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, clear blue, like the winter sky over the Neva River. The lady asked for work, not to be the butt of your sad attempts at humor, he said, walking steadily to the bar. He glanced at Tatiana, and something flickered in those blue eyes. Recognition? Impossible, they'd never met. Ah, Reid, we were just having some fun, the red-faced man grumbled, but he sat back down, suddenly interested in his drink. The newcomer Reid nodded to the barkeeper. Whiskey, Tom? Then he turned to Tatiana. Madam, if you're looking for respectable work, the Paradise Ranch is hiring. Mrs. Nelson needs help with the house and the cooking since her daughter married and moved to Austin. Tatiana hesitated, studying him. This is far from town. 5 miles west, he replied, accepting his drink from the barkeeper. I work there. I'm heading back after I finish this. I could escort you, if you'd like to inquire about the position. The offer seemed genuine, but Tatiana had learned caution. Why you help me? You do not know me. Reid took a sip of his whiskey, then set the glass down. When he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that only she could hear. Because that voice of yours, it sounds like home. Tatiana's eyes widened. His accent was pure American West, nothing like her Russian intonation. Before she could question him, he continued. My mother was from Kiev. Came over when she was 16. She's been gone 7 years now, but hearing you speak. He shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. Anyway, the offer stands. The Nelsons are good people. Tatiana considered her options. Her funds were dwindling, and she'd found no welcome in town. This man Reid seemed sincere, and the prospect of work outside of town, away from the mockery, was appealing. I accept your offer, she said finally. I will get my belongings from hotel. An hour later, Tatiana sat beside Reid in a wagon headed west out of Willow Creek. Her trunk and satchel were secured in the back. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but Tatiana had questions. Your mother was from Kiev? This is in Ukraine, not Russia, but close. Reid nodded, keeping his eyes on the trail. Yes, madam. She met my father when he was traveling through Europe on business. Love at first sight, according to him. Your father, he is American? Born and raised in Missouri. He was a trader. Brought my mother back to the States when they married. They settled in Kansas initially. And now you are Cowboy in Texas, Tatiana observed. Reid smiled slightly. Ranch foreman. Been with the Nelsons for 5 years now. What is your name? Full name? Reid Novak. And you? Tatiana Andersen. My father was Swedish diplomat in Russia. He met my mother there. Reid nodded. So we both come from people who crossed oceans for love. The observation warmed something in Tatiana's chest. Yes, I suppose we do. The Paradise Ranch came into view as they crested a hill, a sprawling main house with several outbuildings, corrals, and vast pastures stretching toward the horizon. Cattle dotted the landscape, and in the distance, several riders moved among the herd. It's beautiful, Tatiana said softly. It is. The Nelsons have built something special here. Reid guided the wagon toward the main house. Mr. Nelson is one of the most respected ranchers in the county. Fair, honest. His wife Harriet runs the household with the same principles. As they approached, A woman emerged onto the porch, gray-haired, sturdy, with a kind face creased by years in the sun. She watched them with curious eyes as Reid helped Tatiana down from the wagon. "Mrs. Nelson," Reid called. "This is Miss Tatiana Andersen. She's new in town, looking for work. I thought of your need for household help." Harriet Nelson descended the porch steps, her assessing gaze taking in Tatiana's neat appearance. "You're not from around here, are you, child?" "No, madam. I am from Russia. I came to America 6 months ago, after my parents died." "Russia? Goodness gracious." Mrs. Nelson's eyebrows rose. "That's quite a journey. Can you cook? Clean?" "Yes, madam. I am also skilled seamstress." "A seamstress? Well, that's a blessing. We're always mending something around here." Mrs. Nelson smiled, the warmth reaching her eyes. "I can offer room and board plus $15 a month. It's honest work, but not easy. I do not fear hard work, Mrs. Nelson. I accept your offer gratefully." "Good. Reid, help Miss Andersen with her things. I'll show her to the room in the east wing." Mrs. Nelson turned back to Tatiana. "You'll have your own space, simple but private. Meals are at 6, noon, and 6 again. Sundays are for rest and worship, if you're so inclined." Reid carried Tatiana's trunk to a small but comfortable room off the kitchen. It contained a narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the eastern pasture. It was more privacy than Tatiana had expected, and far more welcoming than her reception in town. "Thank you," she said to Reid as he set down her trunk. "For everything." He tipped his hat. "Welcome to Paradise, Miss Andersen." The days fell into a rhythm at Paradise Ranch. Tatiana rose before dawn to help prepare breakfast for the ranch hands. The work was demanding but satisfying: cooking, cleaning, mending, laundering. Mrs. Nelson proved to be a fair employer, patient with Tatiana's occasional language confusions and appreciative of her diligence. Most days, Tatiana caught only glimpses of Reid as he came in for meals with the other ranch hands or consulted with Mr. Nelson about ranch business. But occasionally, their paths would cross in quieter moments at the well while she drew water, or in the evening when she sat on the back porch mending clothes. 2 weeks after her arrival, Tatiana was hanging laundry when Reid approached, leading his horse. "Miss Andersen," he greeted her. "Settling in well?" "Yes, thank you." "Mrs. Nelson is kind employer." Reid nodded, looking as if he wanted to say more but wasn't sure how to proceed. Finally, he asked, "May I ask what brought you all the way from Russia to Willow Creek, Texas?" Tatiana secured a sheet to the line before answering. "My parents died in influenza outbreak last winter. My father's diplomatic position provided home in Russia, but after their deaths, I had nothing. My mother's friend had moved to New York years before, so I traveled there first. She helped me find advertisement for seamstress position in Texas newspaper. The position with Mrs. Miller." "Yes." "I sold my mother's jewelry to pay for journey. I thought to start new life here." Reid's expression softened. "I'm sorry about your parents. Losing my mother was hard enough. I can't imagine losing both at once." "Life continues," Tatiana said simply. "We adapt." "Yes, we do." Reid hesitated, then said, "I'm riding into town tomorrow for supplies. Mrs. Nelson mentioned needing fabric for new curtains. Would you like to come along, help select it?" Tatiana felt a flutter of apprehension at the thought of returning to town. "The people there, they were not kind about my accent." "I'll be with you this time," Reid said, his jaw setting firmly. "And folks around here generally know better than to cross the Paradise Ranch foreman." Despite her reservations, Tatiana found herself nodding. "Yes, I will come. Thank you." The following morning, Tatiana dressed with extra care in her blue dress, the same one she'd worn her first day in town. This time, however, she rode beside Reid in the wagon, not as a desperate stranger but as an employee of Paradise Ranch. The change in reception was immediate and noticeable. The general store owner who had dismissed her now greeted her respectfully, addressing her as Miss Andersen, and listening attentively as she selected fabric for Mrs. Nelson's curtains. The difference wasn't in Tatiana, her accent remained the same, but in the company she kept. Reid's presence conferred a status she hadn't possessed alone. See something you like? Reid asked as she lingered over a bolt of deep red fabric. It is beautiful, Tatiana admitted. It reminds me of the curtains in my mother's sitting room in St. Petersburg. Without hesitation, Reid told the shopkeeper. We'll take 3 yards of that as well. Oh no, I cannot, Tatiana protested. Consider it a welcome gift, Reid said quietly. To make your room feel more like home. The simple kindness touched her deeply. Thank you. As they continued their errands, Tatiana became aware of curious glances from the townspeople, particularly the young women. One blonde in a pink dress made a point of stopping Reid for conversation, her manner overly familiar. Reid Novak, where have you been hiding? We missed you at the social last month. Been busy at the ranch, Miss Davis, Reid replied politely but without encouragement. Well, don't forget the harvest dance is coming up. I saved you a spot on my dance card. We should continue our errands, Reid said, tipping his hat to Miss Davis. Good day, miss. As they walked away, Reid leaned closer to Tatiana. That was well handled. She was not subtle with her interest in you, Tatiana observed. Charlotte Davis has been trying to secure a proposal from me for 2 years, Reid admitted with a sigh. Her father owns the bank. She thinks being Mrs. Foreman would be romantic. And you do not agree? I think marriage should be based on more than someone's position or bank account. They completed their errands without further incident, though Tatiana noticed Reid positioning himself protectively beside her whenever they encountered the men who had mocked her in the saloon. By the time they headed back to Paradise Ranch, the sun was beginning to lower in the western sky. Thank you for today, Tatiana said as the wagon rolled along the dusty road. It was much better experience than first time in town. People can be small-minded when faced with something or someone different. Doesn't make it right. Your mother, did she experience same treatment? Reid was quiet for a moment. Yes. She always said the hardest part wasn't the work or the different customs, but the way people looked at her like she was strange for speaking differently. Yet she stayed. She loved my father. And eventually she found her place. Made friends who valued her for who she was, not where she came from. Reid glanced at Tatiana. It gets better. Tatiana nodded, watching the landscape roll by. I hope so. Summer heat gave way to autumn crispness as September turned to October. Tatiana had been at Paradise Ranch for nearly 2 months, and the place had begun to feel like home. Mrs. Nelson praised her cooking and sewing, and even Mr. Nelson, a man of few words, had commented on how well mended his shirts were. Reid remained a steady presence, though their interactions were limited by their respective duties. Still, Tatiana found herself looking forward to the moments when their paths crossed, his greeting at breakfast, the occasional exchange when he came to the house on ranch business, the rare times when they both happened to be on the porch in the evening, watching the sunset. One such evening in mid-October, Tatiana sat mending a torn shirt when Reid emerged from the barn. He spotted her and changed direction, coming to stand at the porch railing. Evening, Miss Andersen. Mr. Novak, she replied with a small smile. How was your day? Productive. Moved the herd to the south pasture. Winter's coming, need to rotate the grazing. He leaned against the railing, his posture relaxed. May I join you? Please. He settled into the chair beside her, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. You've made those curtains. Tatiana followed his gaze to her window, visible from where they sat, where the red fabric now hung. Yes. Thank you again. They bring me comfort. They look nice. Reid hesitated, then asked, Do you miss it? Russia? Tatiana considered the question, her needle pausing in its work. I miss the people I knew. The familiarity of places, languages. The snow and winter. She resumed stitching. But Russia had become place of sadness after my parents died. Too many memories. Here, I can make new memories. Are they good? The new memories? Tatiana looked up, meeting his gaze. Yes. Many are good. Something shifted in Reid's expression, a softening, a quiet hope. Before he could respond, however, one of the ranch hands called for him from the barn. Duty calls, he said, standing reluctantly. Good night, Miss Andersen. Good night, Mr. Novak. As October progressed, Mrs. Nelson began preparations for the annual harvest celebration at Paradise Ranch. It was tradition, she explained to Tatiana, to host a gathering for neighboring ranchers, townsfolk, and all the ranch employees before winter set in. We'll need extra baking, decorations, and your help with everything, Mrs. Nelson said as they planned. And you should make yourself something nice to wear. The harvest dance is the social event of the season. Dance? Tatiana asked, uncertain. Oh yes, dear. Music, dancing, food. Everyone attends. It's a lovely tradition. The preparations consumed the following weeks. Tatiana found herself baking pies and cakes, helping clean the barn where the dance would be held, and in her spare moments, working on a new dress from fabric Mrs. Nelson insisted on purchasing for her. 3 days before the celebration, Tatiana was crossing the yard with a basket of clean linens when Reid intercepted her. Miss Andersen, may I speak with you a moment? Of course. She paused, noting the unusual nervousness in his manner. I was wondering, that is, I hoped you might. He stopped, seeming to gather himself. Would you do me the honor of attending the harvest dance with me? The request caught her by surprise. As your companion? As my partner for the evening, yes. Reid's blue eyes held hers steadily. I'd be proud to escort you. Warmth spread through Tatiana's chest. I would like that very much, Mr. Novak. A smile broke across his face, transforming his usually serious expression. Excellent. I'll call for you at your room at 6 on Saturday. The night of the harvest dance arrived with perfect autumn weather, cool but not cold, the sky clear and filled with stars. Tatiana stood before the small mirror in her room, assessing her appearance with critical eyes. The dress she'd made was her finest work, deep green fabric that complemented her dark hair and fair skin, with delicate embroidery she'd added around the neckline and cuffs. Her hair was arranged in a simple but elegant style, and she wore her mother's pearl earrings, the one piece of jewelry she hadn't sold. A knock at her door announced Reid's arrival. When she opened it, the expression on his face made her heart skip. Miss Andersen, he said softly, you look beautiful. Reid himself was transformed from his everyday appearance. He wore a clean white shirt, a dark waistcoat, and pressed trousers. His hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. He looked handsome, distinguished. You are very handsome, Mr. Novak, she replied honestly. He offered his arm. Shall we? The barn had been transformed for the celebration. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the space. Tables lined one wall, laden with food and drink. A small group of musicians was setting up in one corner. Already, dozens of people milled about, ranch hands and their families, neighboring ranchers, townsfolk who had made the journey. As Reid escorted her in, Tatiana felt the curious stares. She was still the Russian stranger to many, but tonight, she entered on the arm of the respected Paradise Ranch foreman. It conferred a legitimacy that altered the nature of those stares from dismissive to interested. Reid! Mrs. Nelson approached, beaming. And Tatiana, my dear, you look lovely. That dress is exquisite. Thank you, Mrs. Nelson. The fabric you chose is beautiful. Nonsense, it's your skill that makes it beautiful. Mrs. Nelson patted Tatiana's arm. Now, both of you enjoy yourselves. The musicians are about to start. As the evening progressed, Tatiana found herself genuinely enjoying the celebration. The food was plentiful, the music lively, and Reid remained attentively by her side, introducing her to neighbors and friends with evident pride. When the dancing began, Reid led her onto the floor. I should warn you, I'm not the most graceful dancer, he admitted. Then we will be well matched, as I have not danced in many years, Tatiana replied with a smile. But as Reid took her in his arms for the waltz, they discovered a natural rhythm together. He guided her confidently around the floor, and Tatiana followed his lead with ease. She was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, the solid strength of his shoulder beneath her palm, the way his eyes never left her face. You dance very well for someone who claims no grace, she observed. Perhaps I just needed the right partner, he replied, his voice low. The moment was interrupted by a tap on Reid's shoulder. They turned to find Charlotte Davis standing there in an elaborate pink dress, her blonde curls arranged artfully beneath a decorative hair comb. Reid, I believe you promised me a dance, she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. Reid's expression cooled noticeably. I don't recall making such a promise, Miss Davis. At the general store, when we spoke last month, you said you'd save me a dance at the harvest celebration. Her gaze flickered dismissively over Tatiana. Surely you remember. Reid's jaw tightened. I believe I said no such thing, Miss Davis. And I'm currently dancing with Miss Andersen. Charlotte's smile faltered. Well, perhaps the next dance, then? I'm afraid my dance card is full for the evening, Reid replied firmly. If you'll excuse us. He guided Tatiana away, his hand tightening slightly at her waist. I apologize for the interruption. She is very determined, Tatiana observed. Unfortunately. Reid sighed. Charlotte Davis has decided I'm a suitable husband because of my position at Paradise Ranch. The fact that we have nothing in common and I've shown no interest doesn't seem to dissuade her. What would you look for? In a wife? The question slipped out before Tatiana could reconsider it. Reid's gaze grew thoughtful. Someone genuine. Kind. Strong enough to face life's challenges without breaking. Someone who understands that real worth isn't in appearances or social standing, but in character. His eyes met hers. Someone I could talk with for hours and never grow tired of her voice. The intensity of his gaze made Tatiana's heart race. Before she could respond, the music ended, and they were separated by the shifting of couples on the dance floor. The evening continued with more dancing, conversation, and laughter. Reid introduced Tatiana to numerous people, many of whom greeted her warmly, interested in her background and journey to Texas. A few still regarded her with skepticism, but the overall reception was far warmer than her experience in town had been. As the celebration began to wind down, Reid suggested they step outside for fresh air. The night was cool, the sky ablaze with stars. They walked a short distance from the barn, the music and voices fading behind them. Are you enjoying yourself? Reid asked. Very much. It is wonderful celebration. I'm glad. Reid stopped, turning to face her. Tatiana, Whatever he intended to say was interrupted by the sound of angry voices from around the corner of the barn. Reid frowned, motioning for Tatiana to stay put as he moved to investigate. She followed anyway, keeping close behind him. They rounded the corner to find three men confronting one of the younger ranch hands, a boy named Jimmy who couldn't have been more than 18. One of the men, Tatiana realized with a jolt, was the red-faced patron who had mocked her accent in the saloon. You calling me a cheat, boy? The man was saying, his words slurred with drink. And no, sir, Jimmy stammered, backing away. I just said the cards seemed to come from the bottom of the deck. That's calling me a cheat. The man lunged forward, grabbing Jimmy by the shirt. That's enough, Barton. Reid's voice cut through the confrontation. Let the boy go. All four turned toward Reid and Tatiana. Barton sneered when he recognized them. Well, if it ain't the high and mighty foreman and his foreign filly. This ain't your business, Novak. Jimmy works for Paradise Ranch. That makes it my business. Reid's tone remained calm but carried an unmistakable authority. You've had too much to drink. Time for you and your friends to head home. And if we don't? One of Barton's companions stepped forward, hand hovering near his holster. Then Mr. Nelson will be very displeased that his hospitality was abused, Reid replied evenly. And I'll personally escort you off the property. Your choice. The tension stretched, either side willing to back down. Tatiana's heart pounded as she noticed Barton's hand twitching toward his gun. Mr. Barton, she said suddenly, stepping forward. Your wife is looking for you inside. She asked me to tell you wagon is ready to leave. All eyes turned to her. There was no wife. Tatiana had invented the excuse, but the diversion worked. Barton hesitated, momentarily confused. Sarah's here? He asked, his aggression deflating. Yes. She seems unhappy about something. Tatiana maintained eye contact, willing him to believe the lie. Barton cursed under his breath. Probably saw me at the whiskey. Woman's got eyes like a hawk. He released Jimmy, who immediately scurried to Reid's side. This ain't over, Novak. Yes, it is, Reid replied firmly. Good night, gentlemen. The three men slouched away, muttering among themselves. Once they were out of earshot, Reid turned to Jimmy. You all right? Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Novak. Miss Andersen. The boy looked shaken but unhurt. Go on inside. Stay with the other hands for the rest of the night, Reid instructed. After Jimmy left, he turned to Tatiana with admiration in his eyes. That was quick thinking. There's no Mrs. Barton. I know. But he did not know that I know. Tatiana smiled slightly. Men like him are often afraid of angry wives. Reid laughed, the tension breaking. You're remarkable, Tatiana Andersen. The use of her first name, spoken with such warmth, sent a flutter through her chest. It was nothing. It wasn't nothing. You defused a situation that could have turned ugly. Reid stepped closer. You have courage. As do you. You faced three men without fear. I was afraid, he admitted quietly. Not for myself, but for you and Jimmy. They stood in silence for a moment, the music from the barn a distant backdrop to the symphony of night sounds, crickets, the soft whisper of wind through grass, their own breathing. We should return to celebration, Tatiana finally said, though reluctantly. In a moment. Reid took her hand gently in his. Before we were interrupted, I was about to say something. Tatiana's pulse quickened. Yes? These past months, getting to know you. They've been the best months I've had in years. His voice was low, sincere. You're unlike anyone I've ever met, Tatiana. Your strength, your grace in the face of challenges, your kindness. I find myself thinking about you constantly. Reid. Her voice faltered, overwhelmed by the emotion in his words and her own rising feelings. I know it might be too soon. You're still finding your place here. But I wanted you to know that I care for you deeply. And if you might someday feel the same, I already do. Tatiana interrupted softly. Feel the same. Reid's expression transformed, hope and joy illuminating his features. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward. Tatiana met him halfway, her lips finding his in a kiss that felt like coming home, gentle at first, then deepening with shared emotion. His hands cradled her face as if she were precious, and hers rested against his chest, feeling the strong beat of his heart. When they finally parted, Reid rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that since the moment I heard you speak in that saloon. Because my voice sounds like home? Tatiana asked, remembering his words from their first meeting. Yes. And because everything about you calls to something in me I didn't know was missing until I found you. They returned to the celebration hand in hand, a subtle but unmistakable declaration that was noted by observant eyes. Mrs. Nelson gave them a knowing smile, while Charlotte Davis left shortly after seeing them together, her expression stormy. Mr. Nelson merely nodded approvingly when Reid led Tatiana onto the dance floor for the final dance of the evening. As autumn deepened into winter, Reid and Tatiana's courtship progressed with the blessing of the Nelsons. Tatiana continued her work at the ranch, but now there were stolen moments throughout the day, conversations over coffee before dawn, walks in the evening, Sunday afternoons spent reading together on the porch. December brought the first significant snowfall, transforming Paradise Ranch into a winter wonderland that reminded Tatiana of Russia. Standing on the porch watching the flakes drift down, she felt a bittersweet nostalgia for her homeland. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Reid said, joining her. "Yes. It reminds me of St. Petersburg in winter. Do you miss it? Home?" Tatiana considered the question carefully. "I miss certain things. The architecture, the food, celebrations with family. But home is not just place. It is people, feelings." She turned to look at him. "I am beginning to feel at home here." Reid smiled, taking her gloved hand in his. "I'm glad. Because I was hoping you might consider making it your permanent home." Before Tatiana could respond, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. Kneeling before her in the fresh snow, he opened it to reveal a delicate gold ring with a small but perfect diamond. "Tatiana Andersen, I love you. Your strength, your kindness, your determination. The way you've built a new life despite every challenge. The sound of your voice, which felt like home to me from the first moment I heard it. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred Tatiana's vision as joy swelled in her heart. "Yes, Reid Novak. I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to embrace her, their kiss warmed by the promise of a shared future despite the winter chill around them. They were married on Christmas Eve, 1875, in the Nelsons' parlor, decorated with evergreen boughs and candles for the occasion. The local minister officiated, and the ceremony was attended by the Nelsons, the ranch hands and their families, and a few neighbors who had welcomed Tatiana into their community. Conspicuously absent were the townspeople who had mocked her, including Charlotte Davis and her family. Tatiana wore a gown of ivory silk that she had made herself, with delicate embroidery reminiscent of traditional Russian patterns. Reid stood tall in a new suit, his expression one of unmistakable adoration as she walked toward him on Mr. Nelson's arm. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, spoken in clear voices that carried to every corner of the room. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Reid kissed his bride with tender passion, sealing their commitment before their new family of friends. The celebration that followed was joyous music, dancing, feasting on a Christmas Eve dinner that combined American traditions with a few Russian dishes Tatiana had prepared. As the evening progressed, Mr. Nelson called for everyone's attention. "Reid, Tatiana, Martha and I have a wedding gift for you," he announced. "As you know, I'm not getting any younger, and this ranch needs the energy of youth to thrive. Reid, you've been my right hand for 5 years, and I couldn't ask for a better foreman or a finer man." Mr. Nelson's voice grew emotional. "Martha and I have no children of our own, as you know. We've discussed it, and we want to offer you both a partnership in Paradise Ranch. 1/3 ownership now, with the understanding that you'll inherit the remainder when we're gone." Stunned silence followed the announcement. Reid stood speechless, his arm around Tatiana's waist. "Sir," he finally managed, "I don't know what to say. This is beyond generous. It's practical," Mr. Nelson replied gruffly, though his eyes were suspiciously bright. "You know this land as well as I do. You've earned this, son." "We accept with deepest gratitude," Tatiana said, her accent wrapping warmly around the words. "We will honor your trust in us." Mrs. Nelson embraced them both, tears flowing freely. "Your family now, truly and legally." The celebration took on new meaning after that, not just a wedding but the birth of a legacy, the continuation of Paradise Ranch into a new generation. Late that night, Reid carried Tatiana across the threshold of the small cabin that Mr. Nelson had given them as a wedding present. Located a short distance from the main house, it offered privacy while keeping them close to the heart of ranch operations. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, casting golden light over the simple but comfortable furnishings. "Welcome home, Mrs. Novak," Reid said softly, setting her on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "Mrs. Novak," Tatiana repeated, savoring the sound. "I like this name. It sounds perfect in your voice." Reid brushed a strand of hair from her face. Everything sounds perfect in your voice. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Tatiana rested her head on Reid's chest, listening to his heartbeat. Did you ever imagine this? When you first saw me in that saloon? I hoped, Reid admitted, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. From the moment I heard you speak, something in me recognized something in you. Like finding a piece of myself I didn't know was missing. Because I reminded you of your mother? At first, perhaps. But then because you were brave, determined, kind despite everything you'd faced. He kissed her forehead. I fell in love with Tatiana, not just her accent. Tatiana smiled against his skin. I fell in love with man who saw me when others only heard foreign voice. I saw you. I still see you. Reid tilted her chin up to meet his gaze. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that. Spring 1876 brought new beginnings to Paradise Ranch. The partnership with the Nelsons allowed Reid and Tatiana to implement improvements they had discussed over the winter: expanded grazing lands, better breeding stock, renovations to the buildings. Tatiana continued to help Mrs. Nelson with household management, but also took on more responsibilities related to the business side of ranching. Her accent, once mocked in town, became respected as Paradise Ranch prospered under the joint leadership of the Nelsons and Novaks. The same shopkeepers who had dismissed her now greeted her as Mrs. Novak, with deference, eager for the ranch's business. By summer, Tatiana had news that brought fresh joy to their lives. On a warm evening, as they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, she took Reid's hand and placed it gently on her stomach. We will need to prepare another room, she said softly. For February, I think. Reid's expression transformed from confusion to wonder in an instant. A baby? You're sure? Mrs. Nelson confirmed it today. She recognized the signs before I did. Tatiana smiled, her eyes shining. We are going to be parents, Reid. His whoop of joy startled the nearby horses as he lifted her from her chair, spinning her in a careful circle before setting her down and kissing her soundly. A baby, he repeated in awe. Our child. Child of two worlds, Tatiana said. Russian and American. The best of both, Reid agreed, his hand returning to rest protectively over her still flat abdomen. I promise you, our child will be proud of both heritages. We'll speak both languages. You want child to learn Russian? Tatiana asked, surprised. Of course. It's part of who you are, which makes it part of who our child will be. Reid's expression was earnest. I wish I'd learned more of my mother's language. Don't want our child to miss that connection. Tatiana's heart swelled with love for this man who continually surprised her with his understanding and acceptance. Then I will teach you both. The news of the coming baby spread quickly through the ranch and neighboring properties. Mrs. Nelson took on the role of maternal advisor, sharing wisdom from her years of helping other women through pregnancy and childbirth. Mr. Nelson, usually reserved with his emotions, beamed with grandfatherly pride, already making plans for teaching the child to ride. As Tatiana's pregnancy progressed, her body changing to accommodate the new life within, Reid's protectiveness grew. He insisted on accompanying her on trips to town, hovered anxiously when she performed household tasks, and spent evenings reading aloud from books on childrearing while Tatiana sewed tiny garments. Winter arrived again, bringing with it the first anniversary of their meeting and marriage. On Christmas Eve, they celebrated quietly in their cabin, exchanging simple gifts before joining the Nelsons for dinner. I have something for you, Reid said, presenting Tatiana with a small, carefully wrapped package. Inside, she found a delicate silver locket. When opened, it revealed a miniature painting of the Petersburg skyline on one side. How did you? Tatiana gasped, recognizing the view of her hometown. Wrote to a jeweler in New York who specializes in miniatures. Sent him a description from your stories, and he created this. Reid looked slightly nervous. Is it accurate? It is perfect, Tatiana whispered, tears filling her eyes. The Winter Palace, the Neva River. It is exactly as I remember. I thought our child should have something of your first home to carry with them. Reid fastened the locket around her neck. A reminder of where they come from. Tatiana touched the locket reverently, then reached for her gift to him, a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue that matched his eyes, with a subtle pattern worked into the border. It is not as magnificent as your gift, but it's perfect, Reid interrupted, wrapping the scarf around his neck immediately. Made by your hands. There's no better gift. February brought harsh weather and the approaching reality of parenthood. As Tatiana's time drew near, a midwife from a neighboring ranch moved temporarily into the main house to be available when labor began. The night of February 18, 1877, a fierce winter storm howled across Paradise Ranch. Tatiana woke just after midnight, a sharp pain radiating across her abdomen. She nudged Reid awake. It is time, she said calmly, despite the anxiety fluttering in her chest. Reid was instantly alert, pulling on clothes and boots. I'll get Mrs. Nelson and the midwife. Don't move. Despite the storm, the midwife and Mrs. Nelson were soon at the cabin, taking charge with quiet efficiency. Reid was banished to the main house after helping to prepare the bedroom, his worried expression the last thing Tatiana saw before another contraction claimed her attention. The labor was long and difficult. Outside, the storm raged on, as if nature itself were participating in the struggle to bring new life into the world. Tatiana drew on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed, thinking of her mother, her homeland, and the new life she'd built with Reid. Through the pain, she held on to the knowledge that each contraction brought her closer to meeting their child. As dawn broke, the storm finally subsiding, Tatiana's endurance was rewarded with the lusty cry of a newborn. The midwife cleaned and swaddled the infant before placing the tiny bundle in Tatiana's exhausted arms. A daughter, the midwife announced. Strong and healthy, despite coming a bit early. Tatiana gazed down at the perfect face of her child, dark hair like her own, but her father's clear blue eyes, already alert and seemingly curious about the world. She is beautiful, Tatiana whispered, tears of joy streaming down her face. Perfect. Mrs. Nelson went to fetch Reid, who burst into the room moments later, his face a mixture of worry, relief, and wonder. He approached the bed cautiously, as if afraid to disturb the miracle before him. You have daughter, Tatiana said, smiling up at him. Come meet her. Reid sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his eyes fixed on the tiny face peering up from the blankets. When Tatiana placed the baby in his arms, his expression of awe was something she knew she would remember for the rest of her life. Hello, little one, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I'm your papa. What shall we name her? Tatiana asked, though they had discussed possibilities for months. Reid looked from his daughter to his wife, love radiating from his entire being. What about Elena? After your mother? Elena Maria Novak, Tatiana agreed, touching her daughter's tiny hand. For both our mothers. The months following Elena's birth were a blur of joy, exhaustion, and adjustment. The baby thrived, growing stronger each day, her personality emerging curious, determined, quick to smile. She became the center of the ranch's attention, doted on by the Nelsons as if she were their own grandchild. By summer, Tatiana had regained her strength and resumed many of her duties, though now with Elena often strapped to her chest or sleeping nearby. Reid took to fatherhood with natural ease, proud to show off his daughter to visitors and ranch hands alike. On a warm evening in July, as Elena slept peacefully in her cradle, Reid and Tatiana sat on their porch watching fireflies dance in the twilight. I received letter today, Tatiana said, breaking their comfortable silence. From my father's colleague in Washington. The one helping with my inheritance matters. Reid turned to her with interest. Good news? Yes. The Russian government has finally released my father's accounts. It is not fortune, but substantial amount. Tatiana smiled. We could expand ranch further, if Nelsons agree. Or perhaps start something of our own someday. That's wonderful news. Reid took her hand, kissing her knuckles gently. Though I'd be happy living in a tent as long as you and Elena were with me. No need for tent. Tatiana laughed. But it's good to have options for future. Speaking of the future, Reid said, his expression growing thoughtful. I've been thinking. This land, what we're building here, it's for Elena someday, and any brothers or sisters that might come along. You want more children? Tatiana asked, though she already knew the answer. A whole houseful, if you're willing. Reid's smile was boyish, hopeful. A family to match the size of this land. Tatiana leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing through her. I would like that very much. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the vast Texas sky. Finally, Reid spoke again, his voice reflective. Do you ever think about how we met? How different things might have been if I hadn't walked into that saloon at that exact moment. Sometimes, Tatiana admitted. But I believe we would have found each other somehow. Some things are meant to be. Like a Russian seamstress and a half-Ukrainian ranch foreman in the middle of Texas? Reid's tone was teasing but tender. Exactly like that. Tatiana tilted her face up to his. Some voices are meant to be heard across oceans, across continents. Your voice will always sound like home to me, Reid murmured, lowering his lips to hers. The years passed, bringing changes and growth to Paradise Ranch and the Novak family. Elena was joined by brothers Nicholas and Alexander, and later by another sister, Catherine. The ranch prospered under the joint stewardship of the Nelsons and Novaks, becoming one of the most successful operations in the county. As the children grew, they learned both English and Russian, their voices carrying the musical lilt of their mother's accent combined with their father's Western drawl, a unique blend that represented their heritage. Tatiana taught them Russian folk songs and stories, while Reid shared the cowboy skills and wisdom he'd acquired over years on the range. Willow Creek evolved as well. As the railroad came through in 1885, bringing new settlers and opportunities, the town expanded. The people who had once mocked Tatiana's accent now pointed proudly to the Novaks as one of the area's success stories. Charlotte Davis eventually married a railroad executive and moved to Dallas, her brief rivalry with Tatiana fading into a footnote of local history. In 1890, after 15 years of partnership, Herbert Nelson passed away peacefully in his sleep. His wife Martha followed 6 months later, leaving Paradise Ranch entirely to Reid and Tatiana as they had promised. The transition was bittersweet, gaining full ownership but losing their dear friends and mentors. On a crisp autumn evening in 1895, 20 years after they first met, Reid and Tatiana sat on the porch of the main house, which they now occupied. At 42, Tatiana's dark hair showed strands of silver, and at 45, Reid's face bore the weathered lines of a life spent working outdoors. But their eyes still held the same light when they looked at each other. Their eldest, Elena, now 18, sat nearby, reading a letter from a young man who worked at the bank in town and had been calling on her with increasing frequency. The boys, 16 and 14, were in the barn checking on a newborn foal. 10-year-old Catherine was inside, practicing piano, a recent addition to the house that Tatiana had insisted upon for the children's education. I was thinking, Reid said, his hand finding Tatiana's as naturally as breathing, that we should visit New York next spring. Maybe even book passage to Europe. I'd like to see St. Petersburg while we still have the energy for such a journey. Tatiana looked at him in surprise. After all these years, you want to see Russia? I want to see where you came from. Walk the streets you walked as a girl. And I think the children should see it too, before they're all grown and gone with lives of their own. Tatiana's heart swelled with emotion. I would like that very much. Then it's settled. We'll make arrangements after the spring roundup. Reid squeezed her hand. 20 years, Tatiana? Did you ever imagine, that day in the saloon, that we'd build all this together? Tatiana looked out over Paradise Ranch, the land they'd nurtured, the home they'd built, the family they'd raised. In the distance, she could see riders returning from the range, dust rising from beneath their horses' hooves. Closer, the garden she'd planted flourished with vegetables and flowers. Inside, the sound of Catherine's piano practice drifted through the open window. "No," she admitted. "I was just hoping to find work, to survive. I never dreamed of all this." She turned to her husband, the love of her life, the man who had heard beyond her accent to the woman beneath. "But now I cannot imagine any other life." Reid leaned over to kiss her softly, a gesture still filled with the same tenderness as their first kiss 20 years before. "Neither can I, my love. Neither can I." As twilight deepened into night, stars appeared in the vast Texas sky, the same stars that shone over Russia, over Ukraine, over all the places that had shaped them. Tatiana rested her head on Reid's shoulder, listening to the symphony of their life together, children's voices, night creatures stirring, the distant lowing of cattle. It was the sound of home.